How many people here grow Cattleyas? Yay! So whatever I'm saying, you don't care. So I grow mostly standard Cattleyas, and my talk tonight is going to be on I call them heirloom, heritage. We'll just say, well, okay, old Cattleyas. And I brought some vintage Cattleyas here today. So. If you know a Cattleya plant, they are a sympodial grower as opposed to a monopodial grower. A Phalaenopsis monopodio means single, grows upwards. A sympodial grows along they actually grow in trees, as you know. So they're growing just along the bark of the tree, and they could branch out, but they grow along a rhizome.
That's why they climb out of the pot.
They climb out of the pot, and I would show you the one that I'm going to cut up.
Yeah. I have one that really needs it right now.
This is they call the pseudobulb, right?
Yeah.
Pseudobulbs. This is the called back bulb, right? Yeah. And this is the lead growth here, and the rhizome is in between. So just like irises or something like that, they grow in a rhizome. They normally grow from the lead growth here, but at the base of the pseudobulb are eyes.
Thank you.
And that's where the new growth comes out. There are usually in the back some dormant eyes back there. And there are things that we can do to actually initiate that in having them pop an eye, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So,
We can do that.
yeah, well, so I brought a plant in today, and this is an old white Cattleya, cut flower, Nancy off actually, from Waldorf Orchids back east, but you could see it just galloping out of the pot.
Yeah.
And I found this like, I could probably repot this today, right? Here's the lead growth, and here's the flowering sheet.
Yeah.
So this
Put it up against the light. No, the sheath.
Oh, up, yeah, you can actually see it has,
Yeah, you
this
can
one has
see
a
that
double
right
sheath in
there.
it.
Oh, yeah.
You can see the seed right
A lot of the labiates labia type of Cattleyas have double sheaths. In fact, Cattleya labiata, normally the species indicative has a double sheath. So this thing, about ready, and it has new growth. It's got new roots, excuse me. So just ready to repot. And the best time really to repot a Cattleya, or any orchid by that matter, is when they're showing new roots. If they're not putting out new roots, you let it rest for a while. What you can do normally there are some latent eyes or dormant eyes in the back. And before you repot this thing or you cut it up completely, what the old guys used to do at Armacost and Royce and Stewart's is that they would get a razor blade or just get sterilize a shear and cut it in the pot. But don't take it out of the pot yet. Go in, take it, and a couple bulbs back, the leafless bulbs, cut it and leave it and let it sit there. And what happens is when you sever the back bulbs from the lead growth, the lead pseudobulbs, what happens is you might initiate some growth in the back. And that way you don't have to, there are other things I can show you how to initiate the back growth, but that's the old-fashioned way. Back in Armacost and Royce days, they would just cut the back piece and then let the plant sit on the bench for a while. And when the back growth initiates, well, take the whole plant into the potting shed.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And, yeah, so you just leave it in the pot for a while. Another thing, if you don't feel like you want to repot the plant right now, like it's like, I don't know, maybe it's going to flower soon. And that's one thing you worry about. If you cut the plant and you repot it, it kind of saps the energy a little bit, as most plants when you repot it. So in the old days, just put another pot in front of it. So what you can do is get a pot like that, flip it over like that, fill it up with pot, bark or whatever potting mix you have, and then let it grow into the next pot.
Don't say that. What do you say that?
How easy is that?
How easy is that? I know, it's great.
Yeah, I don't know.
And one thing they do at Santa Barbara Orchid States is they pot their plants in rock. And actually, it's granite. It's basically like railroad rock, bedding rock. and stuff doesn't break down. So I decided to just put another pot and put another pot and bring it up. And the mix never breaks down because you're not using bark. So that's one thing great about, if you use that kind of rock medium. But I don't. I use the old-fashioned fir bark, and I'll show you that in a second. What I did bring in, and again, this will be in the raffle, or auction later, I guess auction later. So I brought in 2 plants later to be brought in. So join the fun back there. I'm gonna talk about old plants, but this is a really old plant. This is Albion, and I'll show a picture when I do my talk, but this is Albion variety Fields, EMAOS. And if am I correct, it goes back to 1917. So the idea that you can keep these plants going for like almost forever. If you keep these plants, fairly disease-free and keep a good environment, you can keep a plant going for like generations and generations. And this is 1917. I mean, this is older. My dad was born in 1922.
Wow.
Which is pretty, I said, oh man, you're old. And he's still going strong, 95 years old. But this thing, 1917. So here's something to look forward to. It's a good strong plant. I brought this in because it's repotted and is growing, and I thought, well, if you didn't want to repot a plant, well, here's something that's already established. So I'll bring this for the auction. And this is Crispin Rosales, Sandra Spearman. And this is, we'll talk about it later, but this is a good big lavender flower. Okay. So we have this deal here, right? So given that I'm not gonna sever the back piece there, I'm just gonna knock it out of the pot and put it into a nice fresh clean pot. So while I do that, I will show you what I do. I use gloves, and I try to keep. I would normally put newspaper down here, because one thing about orchids, and especially old orchids, is the thing about virus, and prevalent among most orchids, older orchids, is Cymbidia mosaic virus, which is if you ever diagnose a flower, it doesn't show in the flower very much. In fact, it ages the flower prematurely. So if you have a flower that has Cymbidia mosaic virus, what happens is the flower will open fine, and the plant will show no symptoms. Flower will open fine, but what happens is you start getting little like necrotic streaks, black streaks in the flowers, and the flower will die prematurely. Well, prematurely, I won't say die. The worst thing is color break virus, and it's Oncidia mosaic virus or Odontoglossum ring spot virus, and that causes the flower to the pigmentation to break. That's what we call it, color break virus. And normally, when that happens, ditch the plant because the flower is pretty bad. And the thing about viruses is that you can't get rid of it. Once the plant is infected, viruses aren't like bacteria, and we don't have virucides for plants. What we try to do is try to keep the plant as, or the environment as clean as possible. So even in our greenhouse, keep the place clean and keep, like our house, keep the greenhouse clean, keep the weeds down. I know that's a problem, I got a lot of weeds. Keep the weeds down and just, sanitary conditions. So I have a rhizome clip, and that's what I normally pot this thing in. And unfortunately, I didn't bring a potting stick, and it's oops. That's what I normally would pot this thing up. So here's my thing. I'm gonna system, and it's doing pretty good in the fir bark. What I do is sometimes, you don't have to do this, I put styrofoam packing peanuts at the bottom of the pot. And this is so that the plant drains better. In the old days, they would say, use broken crockery, which, when you pot it up in clay, you break up the old pot and put it in the bottom. And this helps the stuff, the pot drain better. But, yeah, I just use, good old, I buy stuff from, a lot of stuff from Amazon, so.
Like everybody else.
Yeah, so I get the, the peanuts. So I'm gonna clean this off. And, okay. I'm gonna take the tag off for now, because I'll show you what I do with the tag. Okay, we talked about virus, right? Okay, well, the best way to, for me, I think, and it's, is to flame your shears or cutting equipment, whether it's a knife or something like that. If you have TSP works, or chlorine solution, bleach and water, TSP works. There's a study that's been done that powdered milk and water actually, yes, it's powdered milk and water, and I don't know the exact ratio yet, but I think it's powdered milk and water, just make milk. But the acidity of the powdered milk and water will actually, they said, will neutralize the virus. So you just make powdered milk and water and dip it in there. But I haven't done that yet, so I'm still the old-fashioned guy. Either Clorox or TSP, which ruins the heck out of it. It'll rust the thing to pieces, but flame it. And get a butane torch like this, with a clipper thing on it. In the old days, you just, try to spark it, but much easier. So, now that I heated it, and what happens is that once you heat this thing, it cauterizes the cut end. So, if you're a surgeon, you cauterize a wound, well, it'll cauterize the end. And that'll prevent any diseases or something that coming into the cut wound. So, I'm gonna look for probably, normally you wanna keep at least 3 bulbs on a division. 3 to 4 is a good thing, and I'm gonna look for about maybe 3, or 4, excuse me. And I'm gonna cut the back division out. Okay. Now it's got some good new roots on here.
That's a nice one.
You have a lot of this old roots back here, and it's still pretty good.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's going to crunch up in the pot. And the old days, Ernest would say, just keep about 4 inches of roots. Ernest and Leo said 4 inches of roots is fine because it'll branch out again. And you want to clean off any dead roots too. So if you see any brown roots or something like that, just chop it off, cut it off. I keep a spray bottle of Physan. So I mix up a solution of Physan. I think it's Physan 20 or something like that. You get it at your nursery. Mix it with, I think, I mix about a teaspoon for this. Per quart. And I'll just spray it. The pot is clean, so what I do is that I do recycle my pots. And normally, you don't just random willy-nilly do that. If they're plastic, you can recycle them by cleaning them carefully or thoroughly with water and bleach. So Clorox and water. So use a solution of Clorox and water and use it with bleach. And that'll usually kill the virus as well. So clean the pot. Don't you do that. If you're using clay pots, you can use the bleach solution, but you're going to have to soak it overnight in Clorox solution. Get a big bucket, and if you're going to still use it in clay, still potting in clay pots, let it soak in the bleach solution overnight. Other than that, you can put it in an autoclave, they said, or put it in you could put clay pots in your stove, in your oven, and heat it up to like 400 degrees, And for, I think about an hour or something like that, you're basically using it as an autoclave, so you can heat the clay pots. I don't use clay pots because they're expensive. And what happens is they grow into the clay. So I ended up busting the clay off. And the thing about, because I use bark, is that bark is pretty much a very light, porous mix. And it dries out pretty quickly. If I was using, sphagnum moss or some of these other wetter mix, I might use a clay pot, but I normally use plastic pots, and this has been cleaned thoroughly.
Well, the pot absorbs a lot of the moisture.
And it's breathable. A terracotta pot, unglazed terracotta pot is breathable. Air goes through it. And it's a great, I prefer clay pots actually to this. And actually, a lot of my species, Cattleyas, I do grow in clay. They do really great. For a lot of the hybrids, I just grow in plastic pots like this. Now, I know there's a lot of mixes. There's always like a formula for mixes. And I just use good old fir bark. I mix up, here it is. I don't know. It's Kellogg bark. I don't know Kellogg's, right?
Yeah.
Kellogg fir bark.
Yeah.
And it's got
Perlite.
perlite. It's got a little charcoal. It's got little tiny pieces of charcoal in it. Horticultural charcoal. You can't see
Is
too much.
pumice the same type of thing?
It's similar.
Or orchids, I know what it is.
Yeah.
but Does it work with?
Oh yeah, you
orchids
can
as
use
well
pumice
as
or something like
perlite?
that. Sure. There's products. One thing about perlite is that when you start mashing it down into the pot, it kind of breaks up.
Yeah.
So there's pumice and there's other artificial similar stuff to pumice, to perlite that holds up better. And I wish I had that name right now, but to me, perlite's easy to get. You can, I can buy a pound of that stuff at the florist nursery. I put in a little bit of cedar, red cedar bark. That actually, in the old days, the stewards used to mix actually redwood bark. It was redwood mulch. Well, it's so expensive now. You can't even, the trees are sacred. You can't cut them down anymore. So it's hard to get redwood anymore. So I mix in red cedar and.
Where do you buy it?
Oh, I just get red cedar. As long as it's like red cedar mulch. I use red cedar mulch. And as long as it hasn't been, as long as it's natural, it hasn't been, treated with some kind of chemical.
Yeah.
You have to look at some of this stuff, and maybe it's been treated for, pathways and things like that. Same thing with bark. Some of this fir bark, if you, as long as it's recommended for plants, you're fine. But if it's been, some of it's been treated, so it doesn't break down. So.
Why do you use cedar?
You know what? The cedar mulch actually holds some of the moisture too. It helps hold some of the moisture, and it actually helps acidify the bark too. The mix. Cattleyas can be slightly on the acid side, slightly. 7 is neutral, I think, right? pH, but it could be. It's a slightly acidic. So what happens is that the cedar, as is the redwood, is naturally acidic. Redwood is naturally acidic. So part of that is helpful to the plant, the acidity.
Does it have any microbial?
No, you know what? The cedar bark, no, and the redwood bark is not really. These plants now are past the mycorrhizal fungi stage. When they're originally, you need the mycorrhizal fungi to get the tiny seeds to germinate. Dr. Knudsen came up with a solution where we didn't need the mycorrhizal fungi. You added sugar to the mixture and flasked it there. Once the plant gets going, it manufactures sugar and stuff like that. But we'll talk about feeding and stuff like that once we repot the plant. So